In this lesson, we're going to discuss security. Security at the forefront. We need to be concerned with security in the entire life cycle of systems. So from pre-planning a system all the way to disposal of that system, security needs to be thought about. So we're going to discuss why security should always be considered through every process of a system life cycle. And understand how security can make or break a system or a service. So security first. So system administrators, we have a responsibility to our stakeholders. We need to make sure that systems are secure. And that means if we don't implement security from the very beginning, it's never going to be implemented. So thinking about security from the very get-go, when somebody says, I would like to see this type of service, needs to be thought about. Everything we install, everything we remove, everything we configure needs to have security in mind. So if we install a software package, what effect does that software package have on the security of the overall system? Is it going to cause another process on that system to become insecure or unstable? We have to remember that there is no such thing as a secure computer. So keeping in mind there is no such thing as a secure computer, we can go about systematically looking at everything that we are doing to a system and building security in. So while security or a system might be secure at the moment, doesn't mean it's going to remain secure forever. Let's talk about pre-planning system or service. So here at UCCS, we actually have checklists, long checklists of here's the security concerns that we have regarding a system. And I'm actually going to share that with you. It's one of your readings. To go look at those checklists. So we make sure that first of all, it's actually thought about first. It's actually installed in the system. It's in the policy of a system to make sure that we're thinking about security through the entire system life cycle. So we have to discover what that system is going to do. Who is going to be using it? Who are the administrators of the system? How are updates going to be installed? What is the support plan? What about business continuity? Think about, a lot of times people don't think about support. So what if only one person knows how to manage that system? What happens if an unfortunate event happens to that employee? And now your one service support person can no longer support that service. Constantly need to be thinking about, before we build a service or before we build a system, how is it going to be supported? Business continuity is also a very large part of planning. What happens to the data if that system is destroyed? So that goes into availability. How is my data going to remain available if a system crashes or if data is lost? During the actual operation of the system, we also need to be thinking about security. How do we install updates? Okay? Even though this should have been thought about during the planning stage, we still need to think about it throughout the entire operation of the system. Okay, what about antivirus or anti-malware? Is that continuously running? If it's a Linux system, do we need to put undue burden on the Linux system? We should, but is that antivirus software going to cause the system to become unstable? Do we have a disaster recovery plan? And I'm going to keep on emphasizing disaster recovery throughout this lesson, throughout this module, and throughout this course. Because disaster recovery and planning for disaster recovery is something that you always should be thinking about. What happens to systems if a disaster happens? So, is your disaster recovery plan in place and working? How do we know that our backups are working all the time? Are we testing our backups? Okay, what about change processes? Do you have change management in place? We'll talk about change management here in a few more lessons. However, change management is essential to make sure that what you are doing on a system does not either affect the system or service itself, but also does not affect any other system. What about downstream systems? If we're making a change to authentication servers, for example, how is that going to impact the services for the rest of the organization, throughout the rest of the enterprise? Do we have multiple authentication servers that are running to take its place? Can we upgrade one at a time? What about peak times that users need to be accessing that service? All these need to be thought about during the actual operation of a service or a system. Finally, we have the post-system analysis. So when a service is taken out of production or a system is taken out of production, how do we take that system, remove the data off that's important, archive that information, and dispose of the system properly? We also need to be thinking about the environment when we dispose of a system. That also goes into security. Are we making sure our environment is secure? Making sure that we don't sell the companies those systems to those companies that don't have an e-stewards program in place. E-stewards is really essential to make sure that we protect our environment and that systems do not end up in a landfill. There's mercury in systems. Make sure that it doesn't leak into the ground. What about data? Has our data been wiped or destroyed? So this is not only computer systems, but this also goes into paper systems, making sure the data is properly destroyed. So even if we're taking out a service or a system out of production, even while it's in production, are we thinking about how we retain records? Are those records needing to be removed every year or every 3 years? Or what's our plan surrounding records retention? That's another large security issue. We don't want records laying around forever. There's many reasons why we don't want to keep all data all the time. We'll talk about that in a later lesson. So in conclusion, security needs to be integrated into every part of a system lifecycle. So from the planning stage to the destruction stage, security always needs to be thought about. If you have a security officer or you have a security office, make sure they're involved in the entire system lifecycle. Throughout the next few lessons, we're also going to discuss more about how we can implement security into all of our practices.